I've been saying it now all morning. Patch 11.2.7, one of the most fun patches, I would say, at least like end of expansion patches that I have ever played. I'm not joking. I didn't care for player housing, never asked for player housing, but I'm enjoying player housing. I'm becoming a player housing Andy. I was craving logging in and moving shit around and fixing up my house. It was really weird. Also, just I enjoyed the lore walking quest lines. I thought the storyline for the final kind of story leading into midnight was kind of cool. So overall, and there was no bugs. Like, there's these minor things here and there, but overall, the patch launched very smoothly. So really good stuff coming out with 11.2.7. A really good patch so far. Bellular says, Blizzard just fixed WoW's broken new player experience and more. This feels like a real game again. Let's see what Bellular has to say about everything going on right now in World of Warcraft, the final patch of the War Within, and how great Blizzard's doing.
Getting into WoW as a new player is often miserable. Blizzard knows it. They know their watching potential lifelong subscribers never even get a chance. And this patch, patch 11.2.7, is Blizzard's most serious attempt to fix it ever. At the very least, that's what they're praying for. Their plan to solve this new player problem is effectively an assault on every front. Part 1 is the very, very, very beginning. Exile's Reach has been reworked to include major new characters. Part 2 is Dragonflight, but a very different version to the one that we played at launch.
Yeah.
And Part 3 is finally fixing the last 10 levels.
The way I could describe the new experience is like they basically turned Dragonflight into like a story mode campaign. It's like you go through the raids, you go through the dungeons and everything. It's such a good way to introduce new players to the game. And yes, we do still need new players in this game. Not everyone should be like me, some 35-year-old degen with back problems, trying to play this game for 20 years straight. We do need some new people in here for sure. Right? Greg's from accounting is great. He still plays the game too. But new blood, fresh blood in the game will always keep the game healthy and keep Blizzard iterating on this shit.
Problem. But in all honesty, they've done it in a way that you'll just have to see to believe. I'll get to that soon. It's an ambitious plan, but as we're all aware, Blizzard and ambition don't always get along that well. And I'm not just talking about Project Titan, I'm talking about loads of things in WoW. And that means you may know what I'm going to say next. A lot has changed, and it's very messy. Now, we've tested this a few times in the public test
Are there
realm,
broken
both
things?
in old builds and the build that just released and went live, the one marked as a release candidate. And for everything that went very, very right, that we want to cheer, well, something else went horribly wrong. But let's start where the weirdness begins. And that is at the very beginning. Now, if you want the superpower of coding, listen up, because most coding courses are kind of absolute bollocks. I mean, between the lectures, the textbooks, lacks of structure, and that is why I recommend today's sponsor, boot.dev, because they have built something that is different, that is specifically
Noah,
for
the intern,
gamers.
heard about it
And I
from
say
Greg,
that being a BEng computer science, the stuff I went to university for, so when I say I think Boot is absolutely awesome, that's because I actually know what coding stuff is. Now, their founder, Lane, reached out to me years ago because he's a WoW player, and since then, he's got 750k students. Over that, they've completed 33.7 million lessons, so people are using Boot. And that's because it just teaches, I think, incalculably better. Now, they teach back-end development. That's the kind that lands you those lovely 100k plus jobs. It's through a proper 12-month paced program that is structured like a role-playing game.
Look at that.
Now, you'll be learning TypeScript, which they recently added.
I wonder if it teaches you how to use AI to
Go
code.
and Python, from the fundamentals right through to building actual real projects. So it's not some learn to code in 2 weeks scammy thing that just floods the market with another vibe coder with another SaaS. No, Boot teaches you the fundamentals that separate professional developers from people shipping security nightmares. And most of all for me, it's got the sauce, it's fun, it's well structured, the XP, the achievements, even the boss battles, the likes of Boots, and essentially the craft of how it is actually made. You can tell they give a shit. But the best news is you can get 25% off your first purchase at boot.dev/Bellular. The way to save the most would be to do the annual plan, and you can do that with the confidence that if you are not happy, they will refund you on the spot. And you know what? You can actually go and browse all of their content for completely free. And you only got to pay whenever you want the game side of things.
Nice. Okay, the new Exile's
The beginner's
Reach.
island of Exile's Reach was a great idea for the time, but it hasn't aged brilliantly. It came in Shadowlands, which wasn't exactly Blizzard's peak story era, and it tried to set up a subplot about ogre necromancer.
Realm to destroy.
And Voice, thank you for the follow, man. Welcome to our Scourge.
And death magic, that just didn't really go anywhere. So, Blizzard have repurposed it, and the first change is an obvious one. Depending on your faction, either Jaina or Thrall will now lead the expedition. A big character that new players probably will recognize. And if you take a look around, you see the boat is flanked by Kalecgos and Wrathion, so right away you get to see characters with plenty of spectacle who you're going to hear a lot from later on. Now, Wrathion is the one to rescue you early on in the experience, and the final boss of the tutorial dungeon is rather different. Now, instead of all the necromancer stuff, they're using
I will say, story aside, like the fact that Dragonflight obviously leads you into the Xal'atath storyline, which will eventually get you to Midnight, which is why it's a good jumping point. I do think it's a really good spot to start new players, too, because of the dragons. Right? Like, I feel like dragons are so high fantasy. It's always been something like, oh, let me pick up my sword and my shield and fight the giant dragon inside of the cave. You know, that's always been like the most, I don't know, the most fantasy tropic thing there is out there. So I think, bringing people in through Dragonflight where they're going to see a ton of dragons, a lot of magic shit going down and everything else, introducing them to like visage forms and what that is in WoW, because that's kind of a very WoW-ish thing where you could see somebody walking around that's actually a dragon. I do think it's a good spot to lead people off, story aside. I think it's a great way to kind of introduce new players to the high fantasy that is WoW.
Magic to enslave Kalecgos. That's it.
What's up, Envoy?
Well, there's a little bit more that's changed. Instead of stopping off in your capital city, Kalecgos now flies you directly to the Dragon Isles to start the next adventure. That's a small change, but it's an important one. That's because dropping a new player in Orgrimmar for about 30 seconds before then teleporting them away was genuinely disorienting. So, while these are minor changes, they are smart changes. Even if that's mostly because Wrathion's dialogue and delivery is actually some of WoW's best. But now that we've covered Exile's Reach, it's time to get to the most important changes. Even the ones that Blizzard have obviously barely finished making. So, after the repurposed Exile's Reach, Kalecgos briefly introduces you to the Dragon Isles and he then sends you on your way. At level 10, it is of course time to go and do the Dragonflight campaign. The whole thing, which on earlier PTR builds was quite the problem. On our first attempt, we almost made it through the Waking Shores, when the game then forced us into a dragon riding tutorial. That included teaching us how to pick talents. Talents that, of course, are no longer in the game.
Oh, yeah.
But, well, we found a bug report and tried again on a later build, and thankfully, that campaign step is now gone. And with it being gone, we could roll a character and go through the rest of the campaign. Which, in all honesty, is great. And very different, eventually. You see, for the first few hours, it's completely identical, and the important change doesn't come until you actually finish the campaign, which is honestly fine. Low-level WoW isn't the most engaging to play, but Dragonflight's quests are actually a great starting point.
Low-level WoW might not be the most engaging to play. That's partially Blizzard's fault, because everyone loves leveling through Classic. Classic leveling experience is probably the best MMO leveling experience out there. It's a game in and of itself. And honestly, for me, most of the time when an expansion goes live, that's my favorite time in the entire game. I just love questing, doing the storylines, exploring new zones, doing all that stuff. To me, that's a lot of fun. So anytime somebody's not really having fun leveling, I blame Blizzard for that, because I think the overall experience can be a lot of fun when it's delivered right. Now, it seems like they're trying to do that again with this new player introduction through Dragonflight thing.
It also helps that leveling is fairly quick, so you get to pick your new talents, learn new abilities, and get all of that delicious early game dopamine. Here's where it actually changes though. Once you hit the end at Thaldraszus, you'll be somewhere around level 40. As per usual, the game will tell you to go and kill Raszageth to complete the story. Now normally, that would be
Story
a
mode
problem for a
questing.
new
This is
player
great.
in an old expansion. But that's a problem no longer. Blizzard have added in story mode. And that means the new players, for the first time in this game's history, will have an option to experience a raid boss as a part of their leveling up flow.
Which is awesome, because main story points are told through raid. If you skip a raid in a story, you've missed a major part of the game. No doubt, especially a major part of the story. Some kind of big bad just died, or something major just happened, and you skipped it, you're going to be confused as shit. The storytelling is going to be broken. So the fact that story mode raiding now allows a new player to experience the raid and catch the biggest moments in the story, it's just going to create such a better experience overall in leveling.
Even better, Razageth is an absolute
And even a better experience at endgame because they understand the story.
spectacle of a fight, and you fight her
Things happen in
alongside
dungeons, true,
Khadgar and
that's
Kalecgos. It's amazing. Kalecgos even swaps into his dragon form to do AoE attacks. So clearly, it's not just that they activated the system and called it a day. No, they actually did some work. They put some
Why did he go
care
to the
into this
beam?
to make it a good experience. But there's something even more important, and it's this. As you guys may remember, Dragonflight's launch story just ended there. Razageth goes down, the other incarnates are freed, and that's kind of that. Now, the last time we tried WoW as a new player, you never got to see that, or anything else. Alex Straza told us that adventure mode existed, and we had a bunch of side quests to do until level 70. That was the only way to continue. It's not like that,
sounds broken,
because
yeah.
now it is very different. Once the story ends, it does a shocking and unexpected thing for a World of Warcraft story. It continues.
Oh,
You're immediately
look at
given
that.
a breadcrumb to go and do things that we know as patch content. In this case, the Blue Dragonflight storyline.
This was a
And I
good
don't need to
quest
tell
line.
you how good that thing is.
Yeah, that's a good
It
quest
is
line.
amazing. Now, a lot of the context will go over a totally new player's head, but these still remain some of the most emotionally compelling quests in World of Warcraft's entire history. And Blizzard are here showing them to new players. Blizzard are doing a shocking thing. They're putting their best foot forward. They're not known for doing that. Unfortunately, though, not all Dragonflight content is made equal. The Green Dragon quests come after, and you know what that means. It sends you
Why is chat so spicy? Somebody forgot to give Anarian his crazy pills again. You guys got to stop doing that, man. He comes into the chat all angry, and then Moishi talking about shit. You guys are angry today, Jesus.
off to Ardenweald to meet the Winter Queen so that Malfurion can take Ysera's place in the Shadowed Lands. Also, Marithra can become the Dreamer, allowing us to save the seed of Emir Drasil. Absolutely none of that will mean anything to a new player. It is completely incomprehensible unless you've played Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands.
Right.
Which would make sense given the creative direction of the game at the time. Thankfully, the next bit is sort of a step up. I know many of us hate the whole Niffin thing, but Abyssian,
Yeah, the Niffin
Sibelian,
be
and
sniffin'.
Rathian's family drama did make Zaralek Cavern at least a bit of fun. Playing through it while leveling was fantastic. And with the added juice of those quests actually giving you XP and progression, it felt fantastic to do while leveling. With the exception for that little bit where the intro scenario had completely broken terrain and the screen
no.
bugged out. And the other bit that followed at the end where we weren't allowed into Sarkareth story mode. Maybe because we'd already made it to level 72 after just 11 hours. Though, to be fair, we had Warband XP, and of course it was during the anniversary, so maybe new players won't have that problem and will be able to finish the entire campaign, including Sarkareth and, of course, the legendary villain, Farak the Ever-Blazing. Not to pull my
I wonder, can you still get Fearlath? Probably not. I mean, you got to craft shit for it, so that's probably not a thing you can get anymore. The legendary weapon, if you don't know what I'm talking about,
tongue
the
out.
axe that he's holding in that cinematic right now on the screen was a legendary weapon for the time. You probably can't get it anymore. Or at least if you did, you'd have to have somebody craft it. But you have to know somebody who can craft it.
my cheek. What works is you do get the
You can, yeah, I'm sure you can, but you'd have to know somebody personally in the game because you put that crafting order in, it's probably just going to sit there forever.
entire story of the expansion from beginning to end. You actually get the spectacle as well. You can level up and see big,
And you'd have to rerun it over
larger-than-life
and over to
World
get
of
the
Warcraft
drop,
boss
too.
fights. Which, look, say what you will about the story, I would certainly say Razageth and Sarkareth were visually stunning fights. And
Yeah,
that
they
is
were cool.
something that we've basically never been able to do before. Though I should say, it's almost everything. I say that because Forbidden Reach and the Infinite Dragon story are not included in this, so you don't actually end up knowing much about the Drakthir or the Darkheart. Which, given how
Okay.
important the Darkheart is,
Yeah, I'm surprised the Bronze Dragonflight stuff isn't in there because it's very much related to the Dark Heart.
is a little bit odd. That's not the only problem. This
Like, how does a player then comprehend how we went back in time with Galakron and everything? And that dungeon, right? Because that's what's going on there. With Chromie and all that shit. They probably wouldn't get it. Well, that's kind of a miss, I guess.
is only part 2 of Blizzard's 3-part plan. And I've saved the best for last. Though by best, I certainly don't mean good. Now, before I get to part 3, there is something worth mentioning here. If you remember this video, if you remember the story of Milk Genius, leveling did not go so well, and that was because the scaling curve made his life a living hell once he hit level 60.
Yeah.
The good news is that now having more campaign quests basically fixes a bunch of the gearing issues for new players. You're continually getting new gear, and that did ensure that the whole Dragonflight leveling experience was buttery smooth. Almost the entire time, that is. And by that, I mean that almost the entire time, 2 wildfire bombs was enough to kill or almost kill enemies. Nothing proved too challenging for our survival hunter. But now we get to see what happens with part 3 of Blizzard's plan, because that's where things get real weird.
Ooh.
So once you move on from Dragonflight, the whole struggle starts all over again. You see, in Zalarek, scaling was fine, and killing enemies only took a few seconds, even when they started to scale above level 70, which is where we ran into problems last time. So that's good news. But in Dalaran, doing the new recap campaign, the spiders did end up being absolute nightmares. Their scaling seemed a bit funky. Thankfully, though, being level 72 seems to have helped a little bit because we were actually able to finish the scenario alone, unlike last time. Now, this is likely only a temporary issue because Midnight will have a stat squish. But Blizzard really needs to be careful with this.
Yeah, the stat squish, by the way, some people aren't realizing it's happening. I literally saw a guy the other day saying, he goes, I'm quitting this game because my marksmanship hunter is like doing half the damage that he used to do in the War Within. So I'm out of here, man. They totally nerfed our class into the ground. I'm like, what is this guy talking about? I was like, does he realize there's a stat squish going down? And I said, I think some people don't realize that because Blizzard hasn't really come out and really talked about the stat squish. And it's happened before. There's been many stat squish. It's probably like the 3rd or 4th time they're doing it now. But yeah, there is going to be a squish and everyone's going to hit less. The numbers are going to be smaller. Eventually they'll work their way up and we'll do it again. But just know that that's happening.
Insane gear scaling jump. It's frustrating, but as we progress, things get weirder still. So, the new thing. Blizzard have just replaced the War Within for leveling. Now, instead of doing the actual campaign from level 70 to 80, you do this new thing called the recap. It's quite obviously Blizzard's lore walking system, but repurposed with a different name and a different narrator. Blizzard calls it a recap, but I would call it something else. Cliff Notes. Perhaps even Cliff Notes of Cliff Notes. So let me explain.
This is great. If they're using the lore walking system to tell stories, I think the lore walking system was so much fun. It's a really cool way to tell stories. We just did it yesterday with the elf one that they just added to the game. So I think this is a really good system to be able to tell stories and take people through some old shit that happened maybe and get them caught up on the lore.
In the War Within's launch campaign, there are 33 mandatory quests on the Isle of Dorne. In recap, there are only 13. The entire intro to Dornegal is gone, as is defending the theater, which does mean you miss Illyria losing her temper, which would be a fairly important thing given her character. Basically, everything except the bare minimum of Belgrim's story has been cut. Going down into the ringing deeps, the full campaign has 38 quests. In recap, it has 6. Not 6 stages to the campaign.
6 quests.
6 quests. You skip over the kobolds and even things that seem important to the plot, like fighting off the speaker's forces. You basically get teleported to one fight and then go straight to the final scenario. Unfortunately, Hallowfall, their strongest zone, is much the same. You meet Faerun, you watch Beledar go dark, and then you literally teleport straight to the end. Not even the cave sequence, which is fairly high octane, and that means you miss Anduin's big character moment, relighting the tower. And it's much the same for every part of the story.
Does Anduin really have any big moments? I mean, I feel like a lot of them tried to be big moments, and they weren't. Maybe the biggest moment was when he B-resed Khadgar, right? Like that was an okay moment, getting in touch with the light and everything like that. But the rest of the moments with Anduin in this expansion kind of felt like, remember when he jumps off the ship and tries to pretend like he's his dad, and it just is like, oh god, you're not Varian. What are we doing here? And then all the touchy-feely stuff with the light. They tried. I give him an A for effort, but I think a lot of the Anduin stuff kind of fell flat. We'll see how he ends up in Midnight. Like the whole expansion and the saga launches with Anduin sitting there in what's the zone, Tanaris or whatever, where the sword is. And, we got Thrall walking up from behind it. It's like him and Thrall getting ready to take on whatever the hell this sword ended up doing, right? And we kind of got some Anduin storytelling, but I feel like as the World Soul Saga progresses, he should take more of a front and center role, We'll see if he does. He ascends to manhood, maybe.
Story. Everything that is not immediately related to Xalatath or the Dark Heart is gone. And within a grand total of 57 quests, about a zone and a half worth, you rocket through the leveling campaign, the max level campaign, 11.1 story, and 11.2 story. It makes for a thoroughly bizarre and disjointed experience. In a way, it serves as a quick refresher, but it leaves out key character moments in order to accomplish that.
Ooh.
And that means it may be actively misleading. Now, Blizzard have tried to get around this, but they've done so in the strangest way, where they've replaced actually doing those things and seeing those big character moments with narrated lines from a narrator. And in doing that, they bring the entirety of the expansion down to about 90 minutes. It sounds rough, but also clearly intended, because it does have some surprising benefits. You may start wondering, how does this replace leveling if it's so fast? And the answer is easy. The quests give an utterly insane amount of XP.
Yeah.
I think Blizzard finally understands something here. The last 10 levels have kind of always been a problem. When the expansion is new, it obviously makes complete sense.
Right.
At the end of one, though, well, sure, people can relax.
Yeah, Blizzard just reduced the cost to go from 70 to 80 with this patch by 80%. That's massive. They know, the end game of leveling is no longer the end game right now. So just get it done so people can get caught up. There's no reason for leveling to take so long at the end of an expansion still.
Play a few alts. But get this, so far in the video, we've touched on a few weird, wacky things. We haven't even got to the really weird and wacky thing, which I'm going to go and do now. So, let's get into Blizzard being a bit sneaky and a bit weird. Of course, we all know that Blizzard don't plan very far ahead with their stories. It even seems in the World Soul Saga that they're kind of laying the new track in front of the train as the train is going at speed. As an example in recap, they've added a lot...
Well, to be fair, because Metzen came in when he did, they ripped up the old track that was already laid. And now, yes, they're trying to kind of lay it as they go, but that's because they changed it all. The Midnight storyline, or the War Within storyline, got completely changed, and Midnight and the Last Titan weren't even thought of yet. So that's why some of this stuff felt so janky. That's why these, all of a sudden, ethereal patch out of nowhere, we're like, what are we doing here? Oh, okay, this makes a little bit of sense in terms of Midnight, but the War Within story get in here? That's kind of weird. And that's because it was really a bridge gap, I think, to get people onto the story that Metzen really wanted to tell.
...to the Azj-Kahet scenario. This truly boggled my mind. Now, this is the scenario where Illyria shoots Xalatath and causes a bit of a scene. They gave her new dialogue. So now, whenever Anduin says Dalaran wasn't Illyria's fault, this is what Illyria says back.
You blame yourself? Illyria, that wasn't your fault.
I could have stopped it all if I had given in to the void as I am fated to.
That's a new voice line, and I'm not joking here. Blizzard have retroactively foreshadowed Illyria's future character arc. And they've done so with one of the most awful, hokey, wooden, stiff lines I think I've ever heard. It is honestly insane. Now, as far as we can tell, this is the only change that Recap made. The rest is intact. But it raises a question. Who is Recap for? On paper, it's for new players to get the War Within done quickly. They will get from level 70 to level 80 in a flash and be ready for Midnight. But I think there's also a much better candidate. Lapsed players.
It's probably because you're skipping some of the stuff that would have told you that she was fated to turn to the void. So instead, they had to give it through a janky voice line.
Who want a refresher, because you can take an alt through it for a shitload of XP in near zero time, and technically you will remember all the core points of a story that you've already done. It basically will serve as a 90-minute leveling burst to give you loads of context clues and reminders for a story you've already played. So now that we're all on the same page, let me ask you this. Why did Blizzard do it this way? I mean, if the World Soul Saga is the big thing they want to do, why not have you properly level through the War Within? Why still keep Dragonflight? It's a little bit weird.
I think because they're prepping for Midnight and the Last Titan.
I wonder why they chose Dragonflight instead of War Within. I mean, for a new player, I do think that getting to see the whole expansion instead of just these hasty cliff notes would be way, way, way better. Especially because it's part one of the 3-part expansion thing that Blizzard are trying to sell them on. So this...
Yeah, but I would say the War Within... I would say Dragonflight is more WoW than the War Within is. The War Within, it would be a First of all, you wouldn't even know who Zalateth was. She would just kind of pop out of nowhere in the War Within. And then you got your Stony Boy dwarfs and all this story about the Titans and everything. Like, learning about the Titans is good, but Dragonflight really introduces you to, like I said, the high fantasy, the dragons themselves, magic, and all that shit. All that happens more often in Dragonflight than it does in the War Within. I think that's the right way to do it. I actually agree with Blizzard on this one.
This thing with War Within recap is just utterly baffling. And I do think it's not done as well as it really should have been.
And the Haranir, oh my god, all that shit.
I think that doing the recap in 4 hours would still be blazingly fast. It would still cover all the content they would need to. But I think it would have done that in a way where people would actually understand the story. Blizzard, with this one, I think have really missed a trick. You know the way sometimes, if it's really well edited, a long movie can feel shorter than a technically lower runtime movie that's just poorly edited, poorly written?
Yeah.
I think this is one of those situations. I think they've tried to be so brief that they've actually compromised how good the thing is. And in doing so, I think they've made it so that Bits of Midnight just won't hit as hard for a new player. That's unfortunate. But I will say that outside of a few progression-breaking bugs, overall, these updates are actually...
Also, Iridikron's part of the story. I disagree with Bellular here. Like, things won't hit as hard in Midnight because they didn't do the War Within enough or whatever, or they chose to do Dragonflight. How the hell would you explain Iridikron's appearance probably in The Last Titan? Maybe he'll show up in Midnight? Because his whole thing is he's going to bait the Titans to come down, then he's going to defeat them, right? Imagine you never were introduced to Iridikron, and then all of a sudden this fucking random dragon shows up out of nowhere, and you're a new player, and you're like, oh shit, and he has this big moment. You're like, what the hell? Where'd this guy come from? You can't skip over that part of the story. I think Blizzard's doing it the right way. I don't agree with Bellular to kick it off with the War Within. I think you'd miss too much.
Be great. And mostly because of the future that they promise.
Yeah, he's the real bad boy.
All of Dragonflight, including its patches, was an amazing experience. Actually getting a whole expansion story presented in a linear, guiding way was a complete game changer. This is the thing that people praised about Final Fantasy XIV with its MSQ, and now we actually have that for World of Warcraft. And if Blizzard were able to properly offer this for every expansion, it would turn World of Warcraft into a game you could wholeheartedly recommend to everyone, maybe even for just the high fantasy role-playing game stories alone. One last thing though, but I bring it up because it's mostly funny. New players technically don't have to do any of this because whenever you land in Exile's Reach, you can just click the player housing button and never go outside again.
If you want to be a housing
unless
Andy.
You need more decorations. So here's your fair warning. Get ready for legions of tutorial skippers showing up in Stormwind with no idea what to do. Now, if you want to get stuck into all the new content in this patch and avoid answering all those new player questions, then I've got good news. This video next will cover everything else that you can do in this patch.
Good video overall. I just disagree with this final take that starting with Dragonflight wasn't a good idea as much as maybe getting more into the War Within would have been. I feel like Dragonflight's story is much more essential to the overall story of the World Soul Saga actually than the War Within is. The War Within, you could have skipped that entire expansion. You don't really need to know about the Earthen and all that. Like, none of that shit matters at the end of the day to the main storyline. All you really needed to know was what happens with the Dark Heart throughout this expansion. That's the only carryover piece. Everything else, Haranir, Earthen, okay, Haranir are people that can whisper, to the World Soul, whatever. It's fine. The Dark Heart is what mattered. And the Dark Heart was a much bigger thing, as a story trope throughout this expansion than the actual expansion itself. So I disagree again. I think they did it right. Dragonflight was the right place to pick up. And hopefully this overall experience ends up, getting people into the game and keeping people in the game, because we still need that. Not everyone could be a balding 35-year-old playing WoW. That's right. Nice video from Bellular, though.